Hello, everyone. My name is Yanori. I have here Tulsi, Elijah, and Nora, and we are members of LocReady. And we're very excited to be interviewing today Mr. Jeff Beatty, who's the Executive Director of Product Localization at Disney. So hello, Jeff.
Hi. I had to quickly grab the mic button.
I know
Hi,
I caught
thanks for
you.
having me.
Thank you so much for coming today. And I did want to note that Jeff and I met in November of 2022 at LocWorld, which is a localization conference where he talked about his career path. And now with your current role at Disney, what would you say is the best thing? What is the best thing about working for Disney?
I personally love Marvel things, Marvel content. Being that I live in Utah, I never really had an inkling that it would be possible to work on Marvel stuff, or it's kind of been like this pipe dream in my mind. Like that would be so cool, and I'm so envious of everybody that gets to do that, but that's not me because I'm not going to move to California. Um, and so when this opportunity came around, the opportunity to jump in and facilitate the spread of Marvel content and Disney content, Pixar content, that's just fantastic. And I really think that I am a big kid in a lot of ways. And when I worked at Mozilla, I worked with a lot of other big kids, and our office space was full of Firefox costumes and cartoons and animations and characters and all of this. It's fun to be in another place that also has a lot of characters and cartoons and big kids. So I think that's what I'm loving the most about working at Disney.
Thank you so much. So I'll go ahead and pass over the next question to Tulsi.
Kind of backtracking a little bit, if you could introduce your current role and a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like at your current company.
Yeah. So as Nori mentioned, I'm the executive director of product localization. That product aspect is an important distinction. A lot of people, when they think about localization at Disney, their mind goes straight to content. Me and my team, we focus more on the streaming platforms where you go to access that content, and ensuring that the experience that you have to be able to go and find content that you want to watch and that your kids want to watch, or that the rest of your family wants to watch, is easily accessible, and that the experience in and of itself culturally resonates with your particular desires in looking for the best stories ever told. So we focus a lot not only on the in-product experience for Disney Plus, but we are also focused on, what if something goes wrong and you need to reach out to an agent, you need to go and read some help support article, or even if you're signing up for the service or seeing a digital ad for it, like a lot of that is our team that's involved in that. My personal day-to-day, a lot of it is spent, because I'm leading the team. A lot of my work is around people management and administrative, like operational administrative stuff. So in the past, for instance, the past few months, a lot of my work has been around defining a strategy for our team and the direction that I want to take localization in the next several years at Disney, and making sure that the gears can keep grinding, making sure we've got our contracts in order, all of that fun stuff.
Kind of going into the next question about your team and your product team, are there any specific skills that you say are needed for product localization working at an entertainment-focused company and for the streaming platforms that may differ from other industries?
I think that it's a very small, like the Venn diagram of people with standard localization skill set and knowledge of streaming platforms and video on demand. The Venn diagram is very small. It's a very niche area. And I don't necessarily think it's because there are a lot of unique skills that someone needs to acquire to be able to work on a streaming platform itself. But I think that the learning curve comes in understanding the business and understanding how a streaming product works. So the more product knowledge that you have, the better equipped you are to be able to adequately localize the product for a particular market. You might look at Disney Plus and just think, oh, well, all of the text elements, that's all that needs to be localized. Well, how do you define a text element that's in the UI? And where does that text live when it's not in front of a user? And how do you gain access to it? Like a lot of the same challenges around transferring copy and like data between systems, that still exists in this sphere as well. But understanding what role each of those pieces of content plays in the UI and in the decision making for a user on whether or not they go and watch something is very different from, for example, Facebook, where it's not a question of going and watching something and finding specific content. It's ensuring that social interactions can happen smoothly, right? So as with anything related to product localization, it's really understanding what is it that the users are hiring the product to do. And once you understand that and understand that deeply, that helps you to be able to adequately localize it for a particular market.
I was wondering if you don't work with content, like you said, so you may not touch the video editing or subtitle and caption tools at all, but any other tools for product media localization?
Yeah, so while in this capacity, I don't localize content. Mess with is probably not the elegant way of saying it. In past roles at Mozilla and at Stripe and before, I have had to interact with different tools and source tools for media localization. In one environment in particular, we were using Caption Hub. And Caption Hub is a fantastic tool. You think that it is, you think that media localization is quite different from general localization of a product. But in fact, there are so many similarities. Sure, there are differences because you are dealing a lot more with annotations, metadata annotations like timestamps, right? And fonts directly within the subtitle file. But there's still a need to establish context. There's still a need to maintain consistency in referring to the same characters with the same names or the same titles or the same. So a lot of the same things that you learn with localization is just applied in a different context. And you have to find how to drive those elements of general localization forward within that particular niche. So Caption Hub, for instance, was a great tool because it enabled us to be able to localize, or enabled our vendors to be able to localize subtitles within the video as the video played. So they could not only localize, but they could test simultaneously. And that saved us cost in doing engineering work after the fact. And it also saved us time because we didn't have to iterate and go over and over and over again. And it's the same with UI localization, like for a website. The more context you can provide, if you can allow people to actually translate in line in the page, that's the less testing that you have to do down the road. So at Disney, at different places, I've used a variety of different tools. I've been a customer of SmartLink. I have built a TMS with my team, an open source TMS called Pontoon at Mozilla. I've been a customer of Localize, of what is now RWS. I've taught Lilt and Lingotech and MemoQ tools in my classes that I teach for Brigham Young, or that I taught for Brigham Young University and now teach for NYU. Recently, I also used Intento. I learned how to use Intento, and that was a phenomenal experience, very unique tool. I think one thing that we often forget in localization, or at least in the educational sphere for localization as you're coming up, is that yes, the tools are unique. Translation memory is a unique feature. It's a unique idea. But there is a significantly wider scope or spectrum of tools that you are using in your day-to-day. So I personally don't really log into our TMS at all. I don't necessarily need to. I'm not the one that's processing all of the jobs, right? What I care about is our finance portal and being able to look at invoices and run financial analyses and things. I care about our task management system. So can I go into Jira or Bugzilla or Trello or wherever, or GitHub, see issues, look at burn down rates, understand what those graphs mean for productivity on my team. There's so many other tools out there that you also have to learn, in addition to knowing how localization tools work. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question. It's probably a long-winded way of answering your question.
No, yeah, no,
But
it was great information. Yeah, no, you're dropping a lot of tools that we have come across in our program here at MIS in our education about localization, but there's also some that I didn't know, and it just reminds me that we're going to keep learning on how to use these tools. And it's great that you said that you don't use TMS and your TMS in the way that we were really taught, just as a localization tool, but you need to learn how to manipulate, or not manipulate, but find the other ways that you can use it for your purposes when you go higher up and think more strategically. So I think that was really great.
yeah, the more senior you become, the more strategically you're thinking. You care more about data and data analysis than you do about the day-to-day processing of jobs and TM leveraging. I mean, you want to care about that, or you want to be able to see data around that over the course of a specific time span, so that you can get a sense of how well that TM leveraging is going and what needs to change to improve it. But yeah, I'm not in there on a day-to-day basis doing that work. I'm looking at the reports. I'm looking at the trends, all of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it off to Elijah for the next set of questions.
Hi, Jeff. Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us. So what I wanted to ask about, and without going into too much specifics, because I know there's some things that you can't disclose, but I kind of wanted to ask in a general sense, if you prefer a centralized to decentralized model, and I guess the advantages and disadvantages of both.
That's a great question. I don't know that there is one right answer. In all fairness, each company's setup is different. I'll tell you, I spent 10 years at Mozilla, and the company that I joined was not the company that I left, even though it had the same name. Companies grow, they expand, they contract, reorgs happen. I think that the best localization model is the most resilient localization model, because you may find that one day you're a centralized team, the next day you're split out across functions. And you still need to find a way to be able to work together, even though it's more of a matrixy dotted line model than it is a centralized core model. And while there are definitely advantages to centralization, I mean, you get a lot of economies of scale benefits and efficiencies. There are also benefits to decentralization. You can really embed into a specific function and give all of your attention to that one area, rather than splitting your focus across a lot of different functions and a lot of different stakeholders, and trying to compare priorities, or trying to compare apples to oranges when you're looking at prioritization of, do I prioritize this marketing campaign, or do I prioritize localizing the UI? Right? It's those kind of decisions are really difficult to make. And not saying that that's the typical decision of a centralized model, but in some cases that is what it comes down to. We only have so many resources and so much time to be able to do one of these things, what is the higher priority and how do you determine that? Decentralizing it, it's pretty easy. You got one person in one function, one person in another, and they don't necessarily need to care so much about the competing priorities between functions, right? So yeah, the most effective one is the one that is the most resilient. And I think resiliency is, as a skill, is really something that employers, especially nowadays, with the economic climate, with the pandemic, everyone is coming out of this period of time and saying, okay, well, it's one issue after another, and we need to figure out how to continue to move forward, regardless of what model we're working with right now. What's the model we'll work with in the future?
Yeah, that really makes sense. And I can definitely see how it's not like a one size fits all. It really depends on the company and its needs, and based on how it changes, that model may have to shift too. So thank you. Moving over to my next question, I kind of wanted to ask about how the role of product manager differs from that of a project manager, and particularly as it relates to your role as executive director of product localization. And then maybe if you can also explain the differences in the workflow between those roles.
Product manager roles are more strategic and less operational. Project manager roles are more operational and less strategic. While project managers do the work to collect requirements and to communicate cross-functionally and to gather up all of the resources and ensure that a project moves from each phase to the next, a product manager is more focused on the why. Why are we doing this? Well, it's because in APAC we have this particular issue with this particular feature. So let's do some research and figure out why this is an issue. Why does this feature not resonate with people in APAC? What could be done differently for APAC to be able to better serve their needs? Why are people in EMEA hiring us to do this job for them, but people in North America aren't? Like, there's a lot more consideration of the why. Why are users doing this and why are they not doing that? And what is the purpose of the product that we are putting out into the world? And how is that purpose applied consistently while also respecting unique regional and cultural elements? So that I would say that for product, if you are a product manager in localization, you are most likely looking at those sorts of questions. And when someone comes and says, hey, we're going to do this feature, you are on the hook to start offering up ideas about how that feature will resonate in different markets, and even proposing user studies to try to determine whether or not that feature will be a differentiator in specific markets. And you're gathering all of the requirements to be able to localize that and passing it off to a project manager to run with the operational execution of localizing it.
Well, thank you so much for the detailed explanation. So now I'm going to pass the next question off.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you for joining us today. I know you already mentioned a couple of times that you are working with UI strings as a part of localization product management, but I would like to ask you about the definition of a work product itself in terms of localization product management.
So I have come to look at the word product as meaning either a good or a service that a person hires to do a job. And that's consistent with a prominent product management framework called jobs to be done, where you outline who would come to hire to use your product and why they would hire your product for a particular job they need done, right? And so when I think about product, I think of it in that sense. What is it that I am offering that people will come and use my product to accomplish? What job are they hiring my product to do on their behalf. So then when it comes to localization, and this is really like going back to that distinguishing factor between, or those distinguishing elements between product managers and project managers, you, from a localization perspective, are asking questions around, so how will people in a specific region hire my product, and what jobs will they hire my product to do that may be different from what people in another region of the world would hire my product to do? And where do those differences stem from? Are there any unifying elements? Is there like a lowest common denominator that could be defined as an MVP, or could go into a definition for a minimum viable product? That ends up being your role. Now, in some environments, that's going to look like doing all of the user research and doing the analysis, doing testing with different features, and even defining requirements for specific features. But in other environments, it's going to look like assuming the responsibility for all of the language within that feature. So you have to understand what the feature is doing, what it is hoping to accomplish, and what job people are going to hire it to do. And then you ensure that the language increases the usability of that feature for that particular market, increases the odds that someone is going to hire it to do a job for them. So that's kind of how I like to think it's a good or service that people hire to do a job for it. And where localization comes into play, you're trying to figure out how do cultural and linguistic factors create differences in the jobs that people hire your product to do.
Thank you. So as far as I understand, there's like specific features for which you would hire, like you would consider to hire particular people to work. So I assume there's a lot of different features, and I wonder how the workflow would differ depending on a feature.
So I wouldn't say that it differs. One of the goals in the more corporate environment really is to drive efficiencies. And so if you are spinning up new workflows for new features, or whenever a new feature comes around, to be able to analyze it and assess what localization needs it has, that can actually create a lot of inefficiencies. So you have to define a unifying workflow and set of criteria and questions that you ask related to specific regions. So when you hear, for instance, that there's a feature coming to the product that is intended to perform this job for global users, you should have a framework already in place for assessing whether or not users in a particular region in APAC will hire that feature to do the expected job or the assumed job. And if not, what is the job that those users will hire it for? So you'll have a framework that asks questions and that contains different steps to try to assess the differentiating factors there. And then depending on what you learn, you'll have other standardized workflows that you follow to be able to carry out and execute. So if your localization function is one that is focused on full feature adaptation, then you'll probably go and you'll define a feature requirement document. You'll work with your engineering team to implement. You'll work with your design team to be able to create a unique design for that region. And then following the engineering schedule and the product release schedule, you'll roll that out. You may even have to incorporate some usability testing and some user-centric testing as part in that process. But if your function is more focused on ensuring that the language directs users toward the job that is intended, toward the job that the feature is intended to perform, then it's the standard. A lot of it is the standard localization process. It's externalizing the content. It's getting it sent out for translation. It's coming back. There may be some testing. You may be able to do some experimentation to determine maybe you translate a string 3 different ways, and you want to see which of those is going to provide the best usability use case for the job, right? Then you'll do that, but it can be the very standard process that you come to find.
Thank you. And in your question, actually, you somehow talked about with whom you are interacting during the localization workflow. And I just would like to ask you to specify a little bit more in detail, like with whom do you interact, with what departments? Because it might vary, like depending on your needs. So who are the stakeholders?
Yeah, you're right. It does vary on depending on needs. I would say that in a product localization capacity, your stakeholders are release management, release engineering, front-end engineering, sometimes back-end engineering, depending on the way that your software is architected. You'll also potentially have an internal products or an internationalization engineering team that is not necessarily part of your team, but is a sister team to yours that you'll work with. You need to make partners with data science, with data analytics, with leadership and product strategy. So there's a lot of people, and in different areas you'll have different unique functions. At Mozilla, we had a community function, and while we did interact with the community, there was another function that was trying to, or whose job it was to define policy and practices for community that was contributing to Mozilla, whether it was localization or code or testing or anything else. They wanted to establish, or their aim was to establish practices and policies that applied to all of it, right? So we had to work with that team quite regularly to be able to represent the localization community in any sort of policy rollout that they wanted to roll out to the company and to the organization. At Stripe, it was a different set. At Disney, it's still a different, there's still some unique, because here at Disney, we're working with content and media content, and there's different rules and people involved in cataloging and migrating and licensing. So there's, each organization is going to have a different set for sure. I think the general rule is make friends with everybody, because even if it doesn't seem like it at first, everybody that you meet is going to be involved in localization to some degree, or is going to be able to help support you in some degree.
Thank you so much. And I would like to ask Nori to continue the question set.
Thank you, Nora. In being that you worked for different companies like Stripe and Mozilla, I wanted to just segue into just your views on the localization industry overall, and how you would describe the evolution of the localization industry in the past couple of decades, and what are your expectations for the future?
So I have primarily worked on the client side, which, you know, I think that we talk about that there is a significant difference between the client and vendor side, but it's not until you're actually in one of those positions that you actually see just how different the two are, right? So for client side, over time, I have seen a shift in the way that localization is considered as a company matures. Very often, in the past at least, localization teams were seen more as strategic and product-oriented functions. And so there's a lot of alignment and cross-functional engagement from that centralized product area. Over time, however, as more and more focus has been around throughput and productivity and words processed, unfortunately, I think that we have lost a lot of our strategic buying power, often because within that setting, we're talking about the wrong metrics. We're talking about the things that matter to us and not the things that matter to the other teams. So it's funny that localization professionals would have a difficult time localizing their own impact within an organization, but unfortunately that seems to be the case. So more and more I'm seeing, even if localization is not organized in an operations role, I'm seeing localization become more operational and less strategic, less experimental. It's more a question of saving money. And that's been very unfortunate to see. On the vendor side, there's been greater, I would say starting about, I want to say about 15 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, I feel like the industry began to embrace technology more. They became less afraid of it. They became accustomed to the understanding that this wasn't going away and they needed to adapt. And so they have come, I think the vendor side has come a long way in trying to offer solutions that will enhance productivity and throughput while also attempting to address quality to certain extents. I think that that's good, but the unfortunate thing in my experience is that it is still largely the clients that drive technological innovation in our industry. And it's not that the vendors can't, they absolutely can, but there has to be money tied to it to make it worth it while for the vendor to do it. I'll give you a great example because this was Mozilla. I can easily talk about it. We had developed our own syntax for localization messages and a file format for UI messages. And we needed a third-party enterprise TMS to be able to ingest and parse and lint that file type and that message syntax and segment it for localization in an editor. As we talked to, I would say about 6, maybe 7 of the enterprise players in the industry, and only one was open to creating parsers and linters and whatever was necessary to be able to support that file format. The rest said, we don't even support Unicode message format. And that's a standard. We don't do it because clients don't ask for it. And that's the unfortunate truth. A lot of innovation within the vendor space and the solution space is driven by what clients ask for, rather than being driven by what they see as being able to, as problems that need solving in the industry. I'd like to see them take that approach more, identifying problems that they're seeing in the industry and proactively solving them. I would also like to see us talk less about machine translation. I think that we've over-rotated on machine translation, and there are other applications for AI and machine learning that are not based on taking over the creative aspect of the localization process. And we can do more to focus on those areas and gain efficiencies and gain I don't know, more traction in our strategic planning and our advocacy if we were to look at those elements of AI and machine learning. So I'd love to see us in the future talk less about machine translation and more about other ways that automation helps us and can be implemented in a workflow.
I have a follow-up question about the data. Like, do you have a particular tool for that, or maybe you are like working closely with like research department? Like, could you please give us a little bit more background on this? Thank you.
Yeah, so I would say that there are 4 components of a localization data strategy. There is operational KPIs, which focus on throughput, vendor performance and productivity, quality evaluations and scoring, like all of the procedural operational aspects of localization that are necessary across the board, right? You running a program like that, you need to be able to independently track and monitor those KPIs. Another pillar or another component of a localization data strategy is cross-functional or functional KPIs. So you need to be able to, and just in case anyone's unfamiliar, KPI, key performance indicator. It's the metrics that are used to define success. So functional KPIs, that is understanding how your work is impacting the bottom line and the target goals. Now, that doesn't have to necessarily be revenue. It could be active users. It could be number of subscribers. It could be the number of, or the case volume that goes out to call centers in different languages. It could be a whole host of different KPIs. Different stakeholders will have different KPIs that they care about. And being able to segment those out by language and identify ways in which you have positively impacted those KPIs becomes critical. And drawing connections between those operational KPIs and the functional KPIs, if you can do that, like that really helps in the way that you communicate to executives and to your other stakeholders about the value that localization brings. So we got operational KPIs, functional KPIs, experimental KPIs. That is where you run experiments within a user interface to try to determine within your user base or a sampling of your user base to determine which translation or which options of a user interface is going to produce the results from your users that you're looking for. I think that experimentation KPIs, there are not many organizations that invest a lot in those experimentation KPIs. I think that needs to change. And more organizations need to be more experimental with their localizations to ensure adequate personalized experiences. And then the last one is language data. And that you produce language data just by doing localization. So it's really a question not about what tools or how you collect that data. You're already collecting that data. The question becomes, how do you make that data useful outside of the localization use case? So you need to learn how to clean up that data, how to store it, how to format it, how to annotate it, and how to package it for as like an internal product that could be used to help create machine learning models, for instance, or help support to define AI workflows that come from a third party or an enterprise solution. So a localization data strategy has to consist of those four, or at least address those four pillars. And addressing them could look like, localization data, yeah, we'll collect, or language data, yeah, we'll collect it as we're localizing, but it's only going to be for this use case. And that's fine. But a robust strategy addresses all four of those areas.
Thanks. It's a really cool insight.
And Jeff, our project name is LocReady, which means localization ready. What would you say makes a person LocReady in your view? And what would be, if you have any advice, what advice would you give them?
All of you that are here and anybody that's watching or listening to this, you're already learning the trade. You're learning the trade of localization, right? So I'm not going to say any particular tools or knowledge of the software development lifecycle. You're already learning those things. What I will say is that what is going to serve you well in your career is knowing and adapt, or putting yourself in situations that force yourself to learn. So learning fast and being willing and putting yourself in those situations to learn. What I have done in the past is sign up to give presentations on topics that I know nothing about at conferences. So I'll be in a room full of like 80 people and I have to pretend to be an expert on a subject that I didn't know anything about 6 months prior. So putting yourself in the situation, saying yes to learning opportunities, that's going to help you enormously. You all are in an interesting and somewhat similar position to what I was in when I entered the job market. Because when I entered the job market, we were just barely coming out of a recession. And so resiliency and learning how to do more with less, those principles and those traits are very important to your immediate and future success. And the more resilient you can be, the more people are going to want to work with you, because everything just becomes like water off a duck's back, right? Like, and the world could be crashing down around you and you're like, yeah, I'm good. I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm about. I'm comfortable with myself and I'm just going to keep moving forward, right? Or I'm going to figure out a new way to do things. So becoming resilient is one good way to be LocReady. And I think that the last one is to really ground yourself in a set of values that you have defined. I didn't realize it before, but in the last several years, I've come to realize that I'm very much a values-driven individual. I thought I was goals-driven. I'm values-driven. Like I base my work and I base the way that I act and behave in specific scenarios based on a set of values that I have defined. There's this great book. What is it called? It's over here. It's called The One Thing. Encourage you all to read it. It's all about how to define your own professional and even personal values and your value system. Doing that has helped me immensely to guide my decision-making on what jobs I accept or apply for. It's helped me to be able to determine boundaries that I set in the workplace. It's helped me to be able to determine the level of investment that I put into my people and how I support them and how I help them to achieve their goals and just how invested and involved I get in that process. So having that set of values is really, really important. And you might sit here and think, yeah, I already have those. If you haven't actually taken an afternoon and written out what those values are and then defined them, and then maybe come up with a few questions to ask yourself periodically to determine whether or not your behavior is consistent with those values, you haven't actually thought it through. So taking that time, knowing what your values are, helps you to know what your worth is and what value your offering is. And it also helps you as you go out into the workforce to look at opportunities and say, do these opportunities fit my value system? Rather than, are these opportunities going to pay me enough? you being paid enough is one thing. Being paid enough and being happy at work, that's the goal. It's not necessarily the salary. It's the salary and the level of satisfaction. And having that set of core values helps you to determine whether an opportunity is going to provide that for you.
Yeah, that's really great. That's really great and valuable advice. And I wanted to thank you for coming to the interview today. Thank you so much for your time. We've learned a lot. Yeah, thank you so much for expanding on your views on your role and your views in the industry.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoy, I'm an educator too. And so I enjoy helping and offering alternative perspectives to students. And if you ever want to keep in touch, LinkedIn is always there. Reach out.